Today is my birthday, a special event that we traditionally celebrate with a barbecue. It is customary to invite only close relatives, friends, and familiar neighbors to this holiday, but this year it seemed that the event had become somewhat unusual and overly extravagant. To accommodate a huge amount of food, we purchased additional grills and smokehouses. Even though it was my special day, I'd always felt responsible for taking on most of the cooking chores. Admittedly, my culinary skills were not outstanding, but the end result turned out as expected. One of the advantages of being appointed as the cook was that there was always a cold beer in my left hand, which refreshed me while I tirelessly cooked meat. Now, the question arises, do you want to receive your birthday present now, or would you prefer to wait until the evening to find out about it? A warm shower was already ready and waiting for me when Amelia, smiling broadly, greeted me from the threshold of the bathroom. "See you tonight, my dear," she purred. "In the meantime, I'm going down to help the boys. Alvin, our oldest 18-year-old son, will soon be leaving for Texas, followed by Louis, who was a year younger but had already received a scholarship to Auburn. They were wonderful sons, and I attributed their delightful upbringing to Amelia's efforts. My only direct contribution was providing them with a comfortable home in which they grew up. Indeed, I was proud to have instilled in them a strong work ethic, but I could not help but regret that I was not a more sympathetic and attentive father throughout the entire period of their upbringing. We devoted considerable time to working in the courtyard and on the terrace, making sure that they were in perfect condition. Then, we lit up some grills, deciding to cook the ribs in the smokehouse first. If hamburgers, hot dogs, and steaks could be cooked as needed, then the ribs required special attention and care. Alvin skillfully lit the smokehouse, and Louis diligently rubbed the meat with dry seasoning. Everything seemed to be going so smoothly that I could almost sit back and let them handle everything themselves. When we finished our preparations, Amelia arrived just in time. Her two sisters also had to come to help with additional tasks. The number of guests exceeded 50 people, and we had to prepare a real holiday. It has always amused me that friends appear as if by magic when there is free food. Despite 40 years, I still felt the energy of a 20-year-old boy in me. Next month, Amelia and I will celebrate our 20th wedding anniversary, which testifies to the strength of our marriage. Our journey together has been very eventful and satisfying. Our love life was not as passionate as in previous years, but it remained pleasant. About a year ago, shortly after Amelia started working, the relationship seemed to have cooled. The prospect of an empty nest seemed to drive her out of the house, and I was content as long as she found happiness. Financially, we didn't necessarily need additional income, but Amelia craved the companionship that her job provided. After working in the yard, the boys and I went to the shower. I even had a new shirt prepared for this occasion, which my mother brought at the beginning of the week. Maybe it didn't fit my personal style, but putting it on was just a duty that I couldn't refuse. To be honest, I thought I looked like a Hawaiian pimp in these clothes. Amelia made a wise decision by insisting that I wear an apron, which turned out to be a practical addition to my outfit. Soon, the guests began to arrive, bringing with them plates of delicious food, carrying gifts, and soft drinks. The weather was perfect, promising a delightful day. Amelia, as always, looked amazing and easily coped with her role as the ideal hostess. Approaching her 40th birthday next year, she easily maintained her youth, looking no older than 30. She skillfully preserved both her figure and her captivating beauty. When the boys were already leaving their home nest, I looked forward to spending a few exotic weekends and unforgettable vacations with Amelia. For us, it was an opportunity to create cherished memories and restore strength after many years of selfless parenting. Mesmerized, I watched Amelia move gracefully between the tables, making sure that every detail was perfectly placed. She easily embodied the essence of an ideal wife and mother, making me tremble. What more could a man want? Soon, everyone gathered began to enjoy the feast. Plates of delicious treats appeared and disappeared in a whirlwind all over the yard. Fortunately, most of the guests brought furniture with them, which made it possible to avoid problems with seating. Various drinks were stored in coolers. In one, beer was carefully cooled, and in the other, soda for those who preferred non-alcoholic options. The cake, safely hidden in the kitchen, patiently waited in the wings. Among the crowd of people, there was one person who seemed unfamiliar to me. I could not understand where he came from, and his face did not cause me any doubts. A tall figure in a dark blue jacket stood in front of us. He stopped at the edge of the party area, bent down to exchange a few words with one of our neighbors. The neighbor motioned Amelia over, and he expressed his gratitude to her, after which he headed towards us. Sensing his approach, Amelia became alarmed. I was silent as he passed me. His presence evoked an atmosphere of uncertainty. My wife, Amelia Connors, greeted him with a nod, and he handed her an envelope taken from his jacket. "Amelia Connors, you are being served," he said solemnly, making a brief statement. After that, he turned around and left as unnoticed as he appeared. At this moment, everyone present was under the gaze of this unexpected scene. Amelia froze in place, her expression void of emotion. After casting a fleeting glance in my direction, she slowly retreated into the house. I stood and silently watched what was happening, without saying a word. The lively chatter of the guests turned into quiet murmurs and whispers, as if trying to dispel the tension hanging in the air. Feeling the need to free myself from the spell of the moment, I raised my voice and shouted, "Does anyone want more ribs? Go and get them!" After a few moments, Alvin and Louis quietly approached me and joined in the attempt to restore the appearance of normal life. "What's going on, Dad?" Louis tried to ask cautiously, but all I could offer in response was a shrug. Alvin started to make his way to the house, but I reached out and touched his shoulder, signaling him to stop, and shook my head in refusal. "Why don't you check if we need another drink or beer?" I suggested, hoping to distract their attention for a while. When the conversations in the courtyard gradually returned to normal, I felt a slight relief. But after 10 minutes, I realized that it was time to talk to my wife. But before I could collect my thoughts, Louis urgently intervened in the conversation, his voice filled with concern. "Dad, Mom is leaving in a Mustang." Louis directed my attention to the front of the house, and I saw my black Mustang convertible speeding down the street at a terrifying speed. When everyone in the backyard turned their eyes to this sight, silence reigned in the once lively atmosphere. It was unusual to see Amelia driving a Mustang. She usually drove a minivan. But in her absence, the Mustang turned out to be a convenient choice. After Amelia's sudden departure, there were a number of questions left, but I knew they would wait until she returned home. Unfortunately, further events went awry. Amelia's sister Lily appeared with a cake, and I made a feeble attempt to portray a semblance of happiness, but her absence left a gloomy imprint on the holiday, muffling the joy that had previously filled the air. One by one, friends and neighbors said goodbye to us and went home. The next of kin stayed for a while longer, but in the end, all the work was done, and there was nothing more to clean and wash. Surprisingly, Amelia's sudden departure remained an untouched topic of conversation. It seemed that everyone deliberately avoided mentioning it, trying to collectively preserve the atmosphere of normality. Now, when I was left alone in the house with my two sons, silence enveloped us. They looked at me, searching for some sign or explanation, but I had nothing to offer. Sitting on the sofa, I was left alone. When they went to their bedrooms for the night, and so when morning came, I was still sitting on the couch. Alvin and Louis got up early, wasting no time to return the borrowed grills and other equipment to our kind neighbors. The smell of freshly brewed coffee made me get up from the sofa, but the absence of Amelia did not give me peace. Whatever was enclosed in this envelope, it must have been very important to encourage her to leave suddenly. I made several attempts to contact her by mobile phone, but the phone turned off. Naturally, I spent most of the night awake, tormented by thoughts and trying to decipher the truth underlying what was happening. After completing the task of returning the borrowed items, Alvin and Louis felt my need for privacy and left. I appreciated their understanding. In search of solace, I took a hot shower for a long time, hoping that this would at least diffuse the situation a little. Unfortunately, the relief was short-lived. Since tomorrow is Sunday, I realized that there was not much I could do in the current situation, but I decided to consider contacting the police for help. Although I didn't know any officers or detectives personally, I had a few acquaintances in the courthouse that I could turn to. Perhaps they will be able to prompt or help in this difficult situation. In our financial relationship, Amelia and I held one credit and one debit card. The debit card served for our daily expenses, and the credit card was used mainly for large purchases. We tried to pay off the debt on both cards in full every month. If Amelia got into any trouble, she most likely had to use these cards. If credit card purchases usually appeared in our bank account statement after a few days, then debit card expenses were noticeable after a few hours. With growing concern, I decided to check what was going on with our credit card first. But after careful examination, I found no signs of unusual or unauthorized operations. Debit card transactions showed a different picture. About 2 hours after Amelia left, she made a gasoline purchase in Pennsylvania near the Ohio state line. 2 hours later, another fuel purchase operation was carried out in Illinois. The last recorded transaction occurred at an ATM in Cedar Rapids, where she withdrew $300 in cash. As I sat and sipped my third cup of coffee, a harsh reality opened up before me. Amelia was not going to return. She didn't just take time to think, she was actively running away from something. Although I loved my wife and did not wish her harm, I also could not unconditionally support her actions. A lot of emotions filled my heart when I realized that our relationship was at a crossroads. Despite the fact that it was Sunday, I quickly, within only 10 minutes, managed to cancel both cards. About an hour later, I went to the police with a statement about the theft of my Mustang, but I decided not to tell about the fact that my wife stole it. Instead, I reported that there was a gasoline card in the car that was used in 3 states, which indicates its western direction. Although I felt guilty for deceiving the police, it seemed to me that this was the only way to get their attention. However, they seemed more interested in dismissing me than in a thorough investigation of the circumstances. After these calls, I did a quick inventory of the house to assess what was left and whether there was anything unusual. Upon closer inspection, I noticed that only Amelia's purse and a small overnight bag were missing from our house. I couldn't help but wonder what she had put there, and that made her departure even more mysterious. For several hours, I was deciding what to do with her mobile phone. Since I had already taken the initiative to cancel the cards, I hoped that its absence would force her to get in touch and give an explanation for her actions. Carried away by reflections, I completely lost sight of lunchtime. Before I realized it, it was time for dinner, and my son came with a couple of pizzas. Despite the abundance of leftovers from the previous day, I have to admit that the hot, salty pieces tasted very good. In the end, we gathered to talk about the events that happened. I shared everything I knew with Alvin and Lewis, and they gave me unwavering support. That night, I found solace in sleeping in my own bed, but after a few hours, it became clear that Amelia did not intend to get in touch. Meanwhile, Alvin and Lewis started working in the summer at a local tree pruning company. It was hard work, but they accepted the challenge and enjoyed the sense of masculinity associated with their new job. When they left in the Jeep, I stood on the porch and waved goodbye to them with a heavy heart. After finishing my coffee, I wandered aimlessly around the deserted house, still experiencing the breakup of our relationship and looking for answers that were never found. In the end, I decided to contact my place of work and ask for a week's vacation, wanting to find time to sort out the situation and find clarity amid the turmoil. Working as a driver to deliver gravel to a local quarry had become tedious. Despite decent pay, the work was physically hard. I was hot and covered in dirt, but at least it didn't require making decisions. I just picked up the cargo, took it away, and got paid. In the early days of Amelia's work at Prescott Casualty Company, we attended numerous corporate events together. These social events included parties and picnics where I had the opportunity to meet some of her colleagues. But over the past 6 months, I realized that we have completely stopped attending such events. Amelia never mentioned them, and they no longer seemed important to her. Although I wasn't particularly good at remembering people I met, I still remembered Jack and Margie Gisson. Jack was an experienced carpenter, and Margie worked with Amelia in the same office at Prescott Casualty Company. Realizing the need for answers, I decided to call the company. "Margie, this is Liam Connor," I greeted her. "Do you have a minute to talk?" Margie replied, looking very busy. "Hi, Liam. I'm very busy right now. I hope it's not something urgent." I hesitated before asking, "Amelia didn't come to work today, did she?" Margie's response was unexpected. "No, we didn't expect her to come." Curious, I continued, "Really? Why is that?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and I felt growing uneasiness. It became noticeable that Marg felt uncomfortable talking to me. "Liam, I don't think I should discuss this with you," she said hesitantly. "I think you should talk to your wife." Disappointment was born in me, and I confessed, "I would love to, but I have no idea where she is." There was another long pause before Margie quickly interjected, "Liam, I'm sorry, but I have a lot of work to do. I have to go," without giving me a chance to say anything else. She abruptly ended the conversation, leaving me at a loss. At that moment, I was seized with a sudden sense of foreboding, indicating that something was going on at Prescott Casualty, and Amelia was deliberately hiding it from me. Suddenly, everything became clear. The reason why we stopped attending Prescott Casualty corporate events became clear. Amelia was afraid that someone might accidentally say or do something that would reveal her secrets or make me suspect that she was involved in something bad. Reflecting on the current situation, I took a cold beer and went out on the porch in search of solace and an opportunity to collect my thoughts. Looking back, I can say that over the past few months, there have been several events that caught my attention, but at that moment, I did not attach much importance to them. One notable change was that Amelia started working overtime several times a week. At first, this did not cause serious concerns, since it was not sufficient cause for alarm. But this became a regular phenomenon, which now acquired a different meaning in the light of recent events. It struck me that Amelia gradually stopped discussing her work when she was at home, and we deliberately distanced ourselves from communicating with anyone from her company. But despite these changes, I noticed that she did not change her appearance and style of clothing. She hasn't bought any new clothes or fashionable underwear lately. In addition, I could not recall any suspicious phone calls or emails that could arouse suspicion. Given the trust one had in my wife, there seemed to be no reason to doubt her actions or behavior at home. Amelia remained kind and loving, and our romantic connection did not weaken. But despite my growing anxiety, I realized it was time to ask for more help. Donald Curry, an old school friend who worked in the courthouse and had computer knowledge, came to mind. Although I wasn't completely sure of his specific role, I knew that he dealt with computers to one degree or another. I contacted Donald, explained the situation to him, and asked for his opinion. We agreed to meet at the glass door when he finished his work to discuss the problem in person and perhaps find a solution together. Before I hit the road, I decided to call Ronwell Home Builders and found out that Jack Gisson, a colleague of Amelia's, is currently involved in a project nearby, working on the construction of an apartment complex. I decided to pay him a visit at noon, right after lunch. I usually had no trouble finishing my Taco Bell burrito, but today I only ate half of it, too busy thinking about talking to Jack. Arriving at the construction site, I noticed that the crew had not finished their lunch break yet. A sense of anticipation swept over me when Jack saw me and, flashing a warm welcoming smile, headed for my car. His behavior seemed to me much more friendly than Margie's, which somewhat eased my anxiety. "Liam, it's good to see you," Jack greeted me warmly. "I suppose you want to talk about Amelia?" I nodded in the affirmative and replied, "Yes, Jack. I talked to Margie today, but she refused to provide any information. I need to know what's going on, man to man, without any nonsense." I appreciated Jack's experience as it reflected my own experience, but I knew that if he tried to deceive me or withhold important information, my patience would quickly run out. "Liam, to be honest, I usually turn Margie off when she starts talking about work. However, I will share what I can. But here's what I know," Jack began solemnly. "Amelia has been in a relationship with a married man from the office for almost 6 months. They tried to keep it a secret, but the rumors spread like wildfire. Margie and the other girls found out about it, and then things started to change. We noticed your absence from company events, and many of us suspected that Amelia was deliberately keeping you away." Expressing his regret, Jack continued, "I'm sorry I can't offer more help, Liam. As for the identity of this guy, I don't pay much attention to these matters, but I can figure it out for you if you want." Appreciating Jack's willingness to help, I replied, "Don't worry about it, Jack. I'll figure it out myself. Thank you for sharing what you know." The new information received from Jack summed up the whole situation. There was no room for misunderstanding. I did not pay attention to what was happening in my own house. Annoyed and offended, I quickly disconnected Amelia's mobile phone so that she could not contact the house. As I was returning to the house, the phone rang. It was a call from the Cedar Rapids police. The police informed me that they had found Amelia's Mustang parked in the bus station parking lot. It was towed to the impound lot, and I can pick it up at any time, paying a fee of $300. Deciding to gather more information, I stopped by the police station before picking up the car. At the police station, I received a copy of the report on Amelia's abandoned car. From the information provided, it followed that she left the car and decided to continue the journey by bus. I couldn't pinpoint her destination, but I assumed it might be Westerly, although I didn't know she had any connections in the area. To protect myself and my children, I stopped by the bank. On my initiative, all our joint accounts were closed, and new ones were open only in my name. In addition, I reviewed the recipients' assignments in the insurance policies, making sure that my boys are their recipients. Feeling mixed emotions, I arrived early in the morning at the appointed meeting place, the Glass Door, where I intended to meet Donald. But absorbed by the gravity of the situation, I drank too much before his arrival. "Liam, there was a divorce hearing today, and Amelia was called to testify," Donald began, but as expected, she didn't show up. "Marcia Ridgway is demanding a divorce from her husband Kelsey, citing adultery. She wanted Amelia to testify that it was with her that her husband committed adultery. Without Amelia's testimony, the divorce did not take place." I absorbed this information, realizing that everything was going according to plan. It turned out that Marcia Ridgway had substantial evidence of her claims, including photographs, videos, and recordings of telephone conversations. Consequently, she really did not count on Amelia's confession. Apparently, Amelia's call was aimed at humiliating her, and it seems to have achieved the desired result. Now it seems no one cares about the situation with Amelia anymore. She has nothing new to offer, and her circumstances no longer matter. Kelsey Ridgway, in fact, confessed everything as soon as his wife's lawyer presented evidence, which led to the judge's immediate decision to divorce. In 6 months, the divorce will be finalized. Kelsey faces serious financial consequences as he will be required to pay significant child support and alimony, given that he has 3 children all under the age of 10. This mistake is likely to have long-term financial consequences. After a long conversation with Donald, he took his leave, expressing a desire to return home to his family. I thanked him for his help and, turning to the bartender, asked for a cup of coffee. At first, I wanted to take one of the red pickled eggs from the jar on the counter, but then I remembered the leftovers from the party. Despite the fact that I drank a little more alcohol than I should have, I managed to get home without harming myself or others. After reflecting on the situation, I admitted that it was an unwise decision. As a result, I began to wrap 6 ribs in foil. After putting the ribs in the oven, I decided to take a shower. When I returned to the kitchen, there were only bones left. Alvin and Louie, when they got home, immediately attacked the pork. They playfully made fun of me until I took the second portion out of the stove. Alvin seemed particularly excited about the Mustang situation. After a 20-minute conversation, I finally agreed and allowed both boys to take the bus to Cedar Rapids and then drive the car home. To cover the expenses, I allocated them an amount of $600. Louis skillfully made a note on the computer in which he allowed them to pick up and drive the car home. Impressed by his confidence, I chose to remain silent and sign the document. The next morning, we had dinner together at IHOP before I dropped them off at the bus station. I couldn't help but giggle when they boarded the bus because they didn't know what to expect during a 2-day Greyhound bus trip. It was an invaluable life lesson. In order to ensure an unhindered arrival, I took the initiative and notified the Cedar Rapids Police Department of their imminent arrival. After making sure that everything would go smoothly, I set about solving the last task that required my attention, finding out the location of Kelsey Ridgway's office. It was not a quick matter. As soon as Margie saw me, her hand instinctively darted to the phone, but time was not on her side. Without bothering to introduce myself, I started implementing my plan. The guards quickly intervened and pulled me aside before I had time to realize what was going on. A moment later, I found myself at the police station in front of a judge who wasted no time in sentencing me to the county jail. There was no trial, there was only a brief exchange of opinions between me and the judge. I was sentenced to 60 days in prison, but to tell the truth, I didn't care. This was the first chance to break free. I called the guys to bring them up to speed. I could have sworn I heard Louis giggling on the other end of the line. If you leave the house unattended for a few days, then no problem should arise, but reality is often different from what we see on TV. I had to be constantly on high alert. Most of the prisoners were uncooperative and were not going to be friends. Besides, there were a lot of noisy and unruly young people around. Surprisingly, the interaction between the younger prisoners and the more violent ones was minimal. There was no question of allocating a separate room, so I had to live in the same cell with a man named Gioconda. I didn't know about the fate of my brother, who found his wife in bed with him and subsequently beat her, but during our stay together, Gioconda and I managed to get along well. I took the top bunk in our cell. The food in the dining room emphasized carbohydrates, which I didn't really like. Fortunately, Gioconda was willing to help me by removing unnecessary portions. He turned out to be the perfect roommate. 3 days later, Louis and Alvin came to see me. They reported that the car evacuation trip was uneventful but expressed reluctance to travel by bus in the near future. Unfortunately, they didn't have any information about Kelsey's whereabouts and current situation. Unfortunately, Louis and Alvin were unable to report anything new about their mother's whereabouts, but they came with 2 boxes of cigarettes as a gift. Despite the fact that Alvin does not smoke himself, he believed that cigarettes would have value for trade, probably under the influence of watching movies too often. Gioconda, on the other hand, expressed immense delight when I handed him the cigarettes. He explained that during his stay in prison, smoking helped him in the fight against excess weight. It seemed that in my absence, leaving the boys alone in the house, it was possible not to worry about them or anyone else. Alvin, as the most responsible, left for college a week before my release from prison. He took a minivan with him, leaving the Jeep for Louis to use. To celebrate my homecoming, Louis and I had lunch at the Red Lobster restaurant. He was filled with excitement because he was entering his last year of school. Unfortunately, he will have to solve problems without my presence. I had other plans. The next morning, when I walked past Margie's desk, she was completely stunned. Her eyes couldn't believe what she was witnessing. With a mischievous wink at Margie, I boldly entered Kelsey's office. But my triumphant return was short-lived. Just 3 hours later, I was back on the bus heading for the familiar walls of the county jail. This time, a 6-month sentence. Despite this turn of events, Louis found a funny moment in the situation and wasted no time calling his brother at College Station to share the news. Gioconda, my reliable cellmate, welcomed me with open arms. I couldn't help feeling satisfied that I had managed to get to Kelsey even better this time. I couldn't deny the possibility that I had really broken something this time. Unfortunately, I never received any feedback, which did not allow me to accurately determine the result of my actions. As expected, I was fired from my job, which did not come as a surprise to me. Fortunately, I had enough money to pay the mortgage and daily expenses. Louis managed it all efficiently without encountering any problems. In addition to Louis's unwavering support, I was regularly visited by other family members. Louis always made sure I had a steady supply of cigarettes for Gioconda. Amelia's sisters also expressed their sympathy during the visits, while neither they nor other family members showed any signs of discontent or disapproval. I haven't heard from Amelia for a while, but oddly enough, we managed to have a family celebration of Thanksgiving and Christmas inside the walls of the prison. But less than a month has passed since Gioconda, my reliable cellmate, left me. To say that I lost him would not be entirely accurate since he was just released before me. Unfortunately, Gioconda found himself in a difficult situation. His wife and brother had already moved to Florida, and he did not know what to do next. Louis saw this as an opportunity and decided it would be great to invite Gioconda to stay with us until he finds his place and settles down. Louis kindly offered to help Gioconda get a job at a tree pruning company, but Gioconda has already decided to move to a warmer climate in the south. I suspected he was considering Florida. Interestingly, on the night before Gioconda's departure, an unusual incident occurred. Kelsey Ridgway was found in an alley in the city center and claimed that she was attacked by an unknown person. The funny thing was that I had a solid alibi, Gioconda himself. When I got out of prison, I decided I'd had enough revenge on Kelsey, especially since he had already moved out of the area, and I just didn't feel like looking for him anymore. I decided to enroll in a course to learn how to drive large trucks and decided that it was a relatively easy task compared to driving dump trucks, which I was already familiar with. Since I had to wait a few months for Lewis to start his studies at Auburn, I used this time to repair and beautify our house. Although I was thinking about selling it, the hassle associated with the registration of ownership of both our names did not allow me to go down this path. Since leaving, Amelia has remained completely silent, not giving us any information about her whereabouts. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Lewis took the Mustang with him to Alabama, since its attractiveness to the opposite sex was undeniable. Although it had never attracted me personally, I admitted that I was no longer as young and attractive as he was. In the end, I managed to find a couple who were willing to buy the house despite the clouds hanging over its history. Although I wasn't completely sure what was meant by their lawyer's statement, the couple managed to make a good deal on the price of the house. The lawyer assured them that Amelia's signature was not required, and I saw no reason to disagree with him. All I wanted was to completely and without any complications break with this property. Using the down payment from the sale of the house, I invested in a drilling rig equipped with a sleeping place. Before I could look back, I was already on the open road, finally feeling free. Surprisingly, I have never felt the desire to divorce Amelia. This idea just didn't appeal to me because I wasn't going to get married again. During my time in prison, I realized that the prospects of communicating with intriguing women are very limited, and JoJo's influence did not allow me to consider other alternatives. Interestingly, Amelia didn't seem to be interested in a divorce either, since I didn't receive any surprises in the mail about it. It wasn't difficult for me to find a job, and fortunately, I wasn't desperate for money, which allowed me to be selective about the loads I took. I tried not to transport anything frozen, live, toxic, or explosive. In addition, I avoided winter trips north of the Mason-Dixon line. Getting used to the tricks of trucking didn't take long, and to my surprise, I realized that I really liked my new life. During one of my trips to South Dakota with a load of agricultural equipment, the situation took an interesting turn. Fortunately, it was June, so the weather didn't create any problems. After handing over the cargo, I continued my way south, turning off I-90 for about 5 miles until I came across an establishment called Belly Up. Despite its modest appearance, the parking lot was filled with large trucks and cars. Intrigued, I decided to stop and take a look. To my delight, I found out that the diner offers breakfast throughout the day, and the dishes are not only generous in portion size but also extremely tasty. Although most of the customers were locals, it was noticeable that several truckers had reached this hidden gem. Looking forward to what I would be offered at this diner, I immediately asked the waitress to bring me my favorite dish along with a cup of coffee. Having settled in my seat, I noticed 3 widescreen televisions scattered throughout the establishment, each showing various programs that did not attract much attention from visitors. A lot of political videos were being broadcast on the screen closest to me, and one of them especially caught my attention. It depicted a charismatic candidate named Robert, who had an attractive appearance and a confident demeanor, which was emphasized by iridescent silver hair. To my great shock, there was a woman standing next to Robert, dressed very much like Jackie Kennedy, with a big smile on her face. It was none other than Amelia, my Amelia. Before I could fully enjoy this unexpected sight, my attention was distracted by the appearance of the largest plate of potatoes I have ever seen, which the girl Betsy put in front of me, playfully remarking, "Here you go, big boy. Is there anything else you need? Tabasco?" Curiously, the hot sauce was cleverly hidden behind the pepper shaker, which made Betsy giggle when she playfully opened its hiding place and poured it onto my plate. Feeling a lurking curiosity, I asked Betsy, "And who is this woman standing next to this chatterbox?" She snorted and replied, "Oh, that's Robert's new candy." There were rumors that Robert needed his wife to support his political aspirations and possibly to counter speculation about his orientation. Pouring an excessive amount of Tabasco on my portion of potatoes, I couldn't help but remark, "She seems to have matured a bit to be considered arm candy," but I thought that in conditions of time scarcity, it is impossible to be too selective. At the same time, I could not deny her beauty, and my personal belief was that older women often become more fulfilling romantic partners. Do you agree? Watching her appearance, I couldn't help but appreciate her transformation. Her once blonde hair had acquired an elegant light brown shade, styled as if she had just left an elite salon. Flawless makeup accentuated her facial features, and a perfectly tailored suit fitted her figure perfectly. I switched my attention from the TV and realized that my waitress had returned to her duties. It was clear why the potatoes were exceptional. The diner was crowded, its popularity evidenced by the filled parking lot. The coffee in my cup was topped up twice while I was enjoying a delicious dish without leaving any leftovers on the plate. Despite the fact that I was tempted by an attractive pie, my well-fed state left no room for further indulgences. Betsy removed my empty plate and quickly put the check in front of me. To my question, "Is he going to win the election?" she replied with a twinkle in her eyes. "We're doing everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen," Betsy replied, sounding disappointed. "He has influential supporters with deep pockets who support him. The locals don't want to have anything to do with him, but unfortunately, we don't have enough votes or funds to stop him." I reached for the money clip, and a slight grin escaped my lips. Betsy noticed this and couldn't help but ask, "What's funny? Do you know something?" Grinning, I replied, "Oh, maybe I have some information." Betsy's eyes lit up with curiosity. "Did they really get married?" I asked eagerly. She nodded her head in the affirmative and added, "Believe it or not, but their wedding was even broadcast on television as a kind of reality show." After a short pause, I continued, "Although I must say that they seem to have missed the traditional honeymoon." "They said they were waiting for him to officially take office," she replied with a knowing smile. Putting a $10 bill on the counter, I said goodbye in a friendly way. "Don't worry, I'm not here to create problems or meddle in matters that don't concern me." As soon as I got out, Betsy leaned over to me and asked, "Do you want to tell me something, sir? Can I get some sleep first?" "That would be very important." When I walked out the door, the smile did not leave my face, and I was ready to meet everything that awaited me. As I settled into the car and looked forward to a much-needed rest, I noticed that Betsy was watching me through the window. I had just begun to sink into a well-deserved nap when I was awakened by an insistent knock on the door. Annoyed, I didn't pay attention to the noise at first, hoping that it would stop. "Go away," I muttered, but the insistent knocking only got louder. Reluctantly, I yielded to the persistent visitor and reluctantly opened the door. In the dark and in the rain, a stern woman in a raincoat stood in front of me. Trying to make out her face, I grumbled, "I didn't break any laws, leave me alone." Not calming down, the woman firmly said that Betsy asked her to talk to me. Despite the bad weather, she insisted on giving her a few minutes. Disappointed, I reluctantly agreed to listen to her, although with a feeling of fatigue and an irresistible desire to return to the much-needed rest. "Please, just 10 minutes, she begged, and there was determination in her look and tone. Annoyed by her insistence, I answered bluntly, "I'm sorry, but I'm not interested. Go and find someone else to talk to." There was disappointment in her voice. "Damn it, it's about Amelia. Meet me inside in 10 minutes. Surprised by the mention of Amelia's name, I reluctantly agreed to her request. Feeling an urgent need, as she closed the door, a half-smile flashed across her face. The restaurant still had a lively atmosphere, and the number of visitors remained decent. Intrigued and a little doubtful, I decided to comply and headed inside to meet her, hoping to get answers to questions about the mysterious situation with Amelia. Next to the entrance to the cafe, there was a special area filled with clothes for rain, which in a couple of months would turn into snow, and boots. I noticed her sitting in a booth by the window with 2 cups of coffee in front of her. Her straight and shiny black hair, with a small white stripe on one side, caught my attention. Watching her tan complexion, I realized that she was a lover of outdoor activities, accustomed to the elements. Her well-tanned skin did not have the softness that is usually inherent in more delicate natures. In fact, she was far from a girl. She was about 30 and perhaps closer to 40. The facial features were accentuated by high cheekbones, on which there were noticeably no traces of makeup. Sitting in the booth opposite her, I held out my hand for acquaintance. "Liam Connor," I introduced myself. She shook my hand, saying, "Sally Wilmot." Out of politeness, I offered her something to eat and asked, "Do you want something to eat?" She refused, explaining, "No, thank you. I just ate a signature dish 3 hours ago. I don't think I'll be eating for a while." Her response was accompanied by a polite smile. Sally then explained her reason for wanting to talk to me. Betsy mentioned that you might have some information about Robert and Amelia. In perplexity, I could not resist and asked, what's so important about Amelia? Sally replied, my brother Kevin is running against Robert. After a short pause, she added, so yes, it's my personal business. Sally clarified, it's not just about personal matters. Kevin represents the interests of the residents of our neighborhood, and we believe that many people may not get fair opportunities if Robert is elected. Puzzled, I replied, okay, but I still don't see the connection between his wife and all this. Sally sympathetically agreed, stating, we don't understand either. All we know is that something is wrong. Our election committee tried to make inquiries about Amelia, but could not find any significant information. Robert's election team remains silent and does not disclose any details. It may be nothing, but we are getting more and more desperate, and Betsy mentioned that you can shed some light on this issue. Amused by her insight, I chuckled a little. I think it's better for me not to try my hand at professional poker if the waitress reads me so easily, I said. Sally leaned back in her chair, confirming my answer with a knowing look. Yeah, she said, confirming my suspicions, you really know something. So, will you tell me? Finishing my coffee, I couldn't help but chuckle at the irony of her words. Well, I began, I'll be happy to answer any of your questions. Expressing relief, Sally replied, oh, good. It was driving us crazy. So, how do you know Amelia? With a sincere sigh, I confessed, she is my wife. We have really been married for more than 20 years and have never divorced. Although I haven't seen her for several years, unless she got a divorce without my knowledge, I believe we are still legally married. Yes, we are still married, I confirmed. Sally seemed shocked and momentarily speechless. She sat in silence, not taking her eyes off me. After a short pause, she finally found the power of speech and asked the question that haunted her, what was Amelia's maiden name? When she got married, her maiden name was Connor, I replied. This woman didn't even try to hide it. Sally hesitated for a few seconds, clearly stunned by the discovery. My God, she exclaimed, her voice full of surprise. This news seemed to cause a storm of emotions in Sally. Meanwhile, Betsy couldn't contain her delight and rushed to our table, attracting the attention of everyone around her. I was overcome with embarrassment and happiness. When Sally got up from her seat, touched by the moment, Sally kissed Betsy on the lips, showing her enthusiasm. She then headed to a quieter part of the restaurant and took out her cell phone to make a call. Betsy, blushing slightly, leaned towards me and whispered, still blushing with excitement, I haven't seen her so excited in 5 years. It's time for me to get back to my car and try to get back to work. It was nice to meet you, Betsy. As I headed for the exit, the rain stopped, which brought a momentary relief. But before I could reach the car, Sally grabbed my arm, stopping me in place. You can't leave yet, she said firmly. You should talk to Kevin. I reluctantly agreed, realizing that a short conversation would not take much time. Okay, a few minutes then, I agreed. To be honest, I'd rather leave it all in the past. Curiosity got the better of me, and I asked, since I mentioned it to Betsy, how long will it take Kevin to arrive? Sally assured me, he will meet us at my house. Do you want to come with me or in your truck? I replied, I'll follow you. I prefer to have my own transport. The Jeep Sally was driving looked at least 10 years old, but I felt more confident relying on my own car. When we drove a few miles along an old gravel road, it became clear that our destination was an old weather-beaten house. The well-adjacent area indicated that someone was inside. The absence of a normal lawn was replaced by an abundance of gravel. Although quite rare, I tried to avoid dirt, although it turned out to be difficult given the circumstances. Noticing the absence of other cars, I assumed that Kevin hadn't arrived yet. When entering the room, my attention was attracted by a specially designated place near the door, where you could hang wet coats and store shoes. It seemed practical, especially considering that there were already a lot of coats and boots in the trailer. The interior of the house had an interesting layout, resembling a classroom rather than a traditional living room. Instead of the usual nightstands, there were desks and computers, replacing table lamps. While I was looking at this unique setting, my gaze met with 3 teenage boys who were looking right at me, breaking the silence. Sally introduced me. "Hi guys, this is Liam. He's here to help Uncle Kevin." "Liam, these are my sons," Sally introduced, pointing to each of them. "This is Tracy, the oldest, followed by Tyler, and the youngest is Tanner." Each of them smiled politely and nodded in appreciation, and I couldn't help but chuckle, finding the situation quite funny. I have to admit, I chuckled. It's a little strange that all their names start with the letter T. It can't help but amuse me because I also have two sons whose names are Alvin and Louis. Tyler was the first to break the silence and speak, perhaps interested in our connection or wanting to start a conversation. At the mention of my sons, Tyler inquired about their whereabouts, ignoring his mother's disapproving look. "Alvin goes to Texas A&M, and Louis goes to Auburn," I replied casually. This simple statement seemed to electrify the atmosphere, causing excitement in the room. Tracy, who had seemed rather restrained up to this point, suddenly became animated, showing energy similar to that of an Energizer rabbit. "I'm really going to College Station in August," he exclaimed impatiently. Curiosity was aroused, and I felt a genuine interest in his questions. Tracy asked how long Alvin had been studying there and what he was studying. Sally gently put her hand on his shoulder, urging him to take a breath and calm down. "Take your time, my dear. I'm sure Mr. Connors will have plenty of time to answer your questions." They didn't know yet that Tracy had received a full football scholarship and had already agreed to participate in the ROTC program. Meanwhile, Tyler's application for admission to the prestigious U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis was accepted, and in a year, he will begin his journey there. As for Sally, she experienced grief when her husband, a brave soldier of the National Guard, tragically died in the Persian Gulf 5 years ago. Tanner chose not to divulge any additional information, and I, respecting his decision, refrained from further questioning. The youngest of the boys has not yet decided on his choice, but his mother, always diligent, made sure that he was not distracted from his studies. While I remained in the dark about the reasons for Kevin's delay, the next hour was spent in conversation with Sally's sons on a variety of topics. Sally watched from the sidelines, noticing how a bond was forming between us, unlike the one I had with my own children. The time spent with Sally's children reminded me of how much I missed my own boys. Kevin finally arrived, accompanied by 2 assistants. After they met, Sally handed out assignments to her sons, and the adults gathered at the kitchen table. There was doubt in the air that I was Amelia's husband, but it didn't matter to me to get into an argument about it. When I got up from my seat, thanked Sally for the coffee, and said goodbye to the boys, Sally strongly protested, "Damn it, Liam, sit down." The remaining faces at the table sank into a hushed silence. Sally took the conversation into her own hands, demonstrating behavior befitting a person applying for political office. "Liam, do you have a marriage certificate or any evidence to support your claim that you are married to Amelia?" With a quick movement, I pulled out a wedding photo from my wallet. Although time had passed, Amelia's age and hairstyle had changed, but her unmistakable presence was still noticeable. My gaze shifted to one of Kevin's assistants, who had a laptop in front of him. "Visit the Civil Registry Office of Berks County, Pennsylvania. They should have online access to marriage certificates from 1960 to 1990. Search by my name, Liam Connors," I instructed Assistant Kevin. Assistant number 1, turning the laptop screen to Kevin, added, "August 17th, 1979. Confirm if this date matches." Kevin seemed visibly relieved by this revelation. I nodded in confirmation. "Good luck finding the divorce records. As far as I know, and everyone else knows, I'm still married. Feel free to explore this issue in as much detail as you want." "I don't care about this situation," I said, feeling that the conversation was becoming monotonous and uninteresting. This time, no one objected when I got up to leave. "Do you mind if I sleep for a few hours at your entrance before leaving?" I asked. Sally replied, "No, not at all," and walked me to the door. Looking back, I saw that Kevin and his comrades were deeply immersed in their political affairs, and silently said goodbye to them. The guys waved to me, or maybe they didn't wave. When I left the room, an hour later, I heard the sounds of Kevin and his entourage leaving. I thought the night passed quietly, but my peace was interrupted by another knock on the door. Sally hurriedly climbed into the cab, dressed in a flannel nightgown, and motioned for me to be silent, putting her finger to her lips. We were far enough away from the house that the boys wouldn't overhear anything, but it looks like Sally just wanted us not to talk. We spent at least an hour together, passionately declaring our love to each other. Although it was somewhat unpleasant, sleeping places in the cab of the truck are adequate at best and serve only for recreation. Given the circumstances, I did my best to make the most of it. Sally left as quietly as she had come, without exchanging a single word. When the sun greeted the day, there was another knock on the door. This time, Tanner invited me to have breakfast with them in the house. Fortunately, boys and men have similar food preferences, and Sally was well versed in the preparation of such dishes. Talking with the guys for an hour, I began to feel light and comfortable. Moreover, I felt comfortable enough to ask Sally for permission to take a warm shower before leaving. An hour passed, and I finally found myself on the road again, albeit for a short time. Soon, before reaching the highway, I was stopped by the local sheriff. It turned out that Mr. Kevin wanted to continue talking to me. I followed the police car to the establishment where Kevin was waiting for my arrival. He was just having breakfast and kindly invited me to join him. Betsy came in, brought coffee, and winked knowingly at me. She seemed to have a closer friendship with Sally than I had initially assumed. Obviously, Kevin's legal advisors were interested in my continued presence. Resorting to the hackneyed phrase, "Time is money," I tried to dissuade him, but he just grinned and continued the meal. It would be easy to agree to everything and disappear without a trace, but considering the events of the previous night, I decided that it would be in my best interests to stay a few more days. The party assured me that they would pay for a motel room and meals, but they didn't have enough money for more. This gave me a valuable chance to refresh my wardrobe, pay unpaid bills, and manage my banking affairs. Using the convenience of Wi-Fi, I took advantage of this opportunity by sending a couple of emails to my guys and promptly paying all the remaining bills. While folding the second batch of laundry from the dryer, I was startled by the unexpected appearance of Sally. "What are you doing, Liam?" she exclaimed. With an innocent shrug, I replied, "Just folding laundry." "But you had to leave, remember? You said you were leaving this morning." "Plans have changed. Your brother asked me to extend my stay here for a few more days. I only came to see you last night because I thought you'd be gone today. But I understand that my presence here is undesirable for you." From the way Sally stammered, choosing her words, it became clear that she had not intended any relationship other than a one-time meeting and did not know how to act in this situation. I was amused by her disappointment, and I saw in it a reason for some levity. Moreover, after the morning conversation with Kevin, I sincerely thought about buying a house and settling in this area on a permanent basis. Kevin presented a tempting picture of the situation, but it's not easy to deceive me with empty promises. I decided to have a frank conversation with Sally, inviting her to sit on a bench next to the dryers. "Your brother insisted that I extend my stay here for a few more days, just until they can agree to pursue Robert," I explained sincerely. "I made a promise to keep my distance from you and the boys until everything is settled. It wasn't my intention to embarrass you or make you feel uncomfortable." Sally shook her head and replied, "That's not the point, Liam. The boys genuinely like you. They have already asked when you can come again. When I told the guys about your departure, they were a little disappointed. Tyler even asked me to talk to you about the possibility of staying for a while longer. I apologize if my friendly intentions have led to complications. They reminded me of my own children, and it was easy for me to find a common language with them. I didn't mean to get you into trouble. I must admit I didn't make things any easier when I approached your truck last night. Of course, you have complicated the situation. Why did you come to me?" I asked. Sally shrugged, showing a hint of embarrassment, and replied softly, "I'm not sure. It's been 5 years since my husband died. After 5 long years spent without solace and passion, it seemed like the perfect moment for such an opportunity to appear, especially since you had to leave today." There were signs of excitement in Sally's behavior again, and she exclaimed, "Why didn't you leave?" Disappointed, I quickly gathered up a stack of folded underwear, handed it to her, collected the remaining things, and then returned to my motel room. Making love to a woman in a normal bed is undoubtedly much more convenient, but most of all, I was pleased with the joint shower. By the end of the first week, all the boys received t-shirts and hoodies with the symbols of Texas and Auburn. Sally kept one of the auburn t-shirts for herself, although it was a little too big for her. Meanwhile, I didn't pay attention to political maneuvers. Kevin and his team seemed to be doing just fine without my involvement. But then, the news about Amelia's mysterious story surfaced, and the media began to present it as a sensation. Robert's supporters made futile attempts to downplay the significance of these revelations, while they continued to deny or ignore the accusation. The situation only worsened, which led to a rapid drop in Robert's approval rating. I refrained from participating in political affairs until one morning, I was visited at a motel. A tall, fair-haired woman with impeccable posture stood on the threshold. Even though I was only wearing boxers, I invited her in. While I was taking out a stack of $500 bills, her eyes eluded me, but I carefully followed her every subtle gesture. Dressed in a dark suit with a white shirt and modest black heels, she gave the impression of an experienced professional. "My name is Mila," she introduced herself. "I'm a lawyer from Levitt's Brothers in Sioux Falls. I believe you are Liam William Connor." The fact that she knew my middle name caused a wave of anxiety. Feeling that the matter was urgent, I took my leave and went to the bathroom. Closing the door to the bathroom, I could not get rid of the feeling that the noise of the water hitting the toilet tank reached me unmistakably. Despite the initial intention to restrain myself, mischief forced me to go for a subtle act of humiliation. Less than a minute later, I left the toilet and returned to Mila at the table. She asked, "Was it necessary?" I replied with a hint of amusement, "No, but from your tone, it was possible to assume that we would stay here for a long time." "I apologize. I was just trying to maintain a professional demeanor," Mila exclaimed, her disappointment palpable. "What do you need?" "Our company represents Robert. We have recently discovered that your marriage to Amelia Connor has not been legally dissolved, and we would like to rectify this situation. There are laws in the state that allow for an accelerated dissolution of marriage under certain circumstances. We believe that with your assistance, we will be able to take advantage of these laws," Mila explained. Perplexed, I asked, "So you want me to divorce my wife?" Mila answered simply, "Yes." Embarrassment clouded my thoughts, and I wondered about her motives. "Why do I need this?" My answer seemed to take my guest by surprise and perplexed her. She didn't seem to expect such a question at this stage of our conversation. Although I wanted to get a divorce, I was careful not to reveal this information to Mrs. Mila. She sat pondering my words before I made a request to her. "Miss Mila, please give me a direct explanation in simple terms why my wife and I no longer live together. I need complete honesty without embellishment. If you can do that, I'll think about continuing our conversation." She leaned back slightly, unbuttoning the top button of her blouse, and began to explain, 3 years ago, your wife had an affair with a work colleague. When she found out about it, she ran away because she could no longer resist you and your children. She hasn't spoken to any of you since." Her straightforward explanation startled me, and I replied, "Everything is clear enough." "So what exactly is the matter?" Miss Mila sighed, realizing my awareness of the news. "If you follow the latest developments, you probably know that Amelia and Mr. Robert are in a difficult legal situation. Unfortunately, we cannot fix what has already happened. We hope that we can ease her situation by contributing to a quick divorce," explained Miss Mila. I raised an eyebrow. "That's right. And remind me again, what will I get out of all this?" "Freedom," she replied. I chuckled softly. "Well, I'm quite happy with the way things are now. You will have to convince me that my life will get better and not remain the same." She paused, trying to understand my point of view. "What do you want, Mr. Connors? Do you wish to receive financial compensation? If so, in what size? Please give me something to work with." I leaned over, looking at her intently. "What are the terms of the divorce you are proposing?" Her answer was unexpected. "None. That is why the process can be accelerated," Miss Mila explained. "There is no exchange of money, no division of property, no custody dispute. Both sides simply leave with what they have at the moment without owing anything to each other. This is a clean and final decision." Curious, I asked, "How long does it usually take?" "Less than 90 days, she replied. "This means that the decision will be made before the elections." A knowing look flashed between us, and she, though with difficulty, recognized its significance. Do I need to see my wife? I asked, hoping for reassurance. No, Mrs. Mila replied. Moreover, we'd rather you didn't. The next question seemed to strain her a lot, and she sighed before I answered, yes, good. I agreed to this, but on one condition: you must pay my accommodation and food expenses before the process is completed. Suddenly, a smile appeared on Mila's face. It was clear that the result exceeded her initial expectations. Even though I had the opportunity to bargain for a significant amount, the prospect of getting freedom without financial encumbrance at the moment was very attractive. I can prepare the necessary documents and give them to you for signature this afternoon, she assured me. Everything should be fine. I will need to consult with my lawyer, but I don't expect any problems. Although I don't have a legal representative, I wanted to discuss this with Kevin first. Could you give me your contact information? I assure you that if my lawyer has any problems, I will contact you. If you don't get a call, please bring the documents directly to me. Having crossed this task off the list, I felt relieved. Since I had to have breakfast, I walked her to the door wearing jeans and no shirt. When she was leaving, I noticed Sally on the other side of the parking lot, but before I could signal her, she quickly sped away. I quickly shaved, got dressed, and headed to belly up. Betsy gave me a disapproving look as she poured me coffee. Will they at least give me a chance to explain everything? I asked. Not to me, Mr. Connors, but you better come up with a good story for Sally. Breakfast was hot, but the conversation was cool. I finished eating as fast as I could and immediately called Kevin. Unfortunately, he was out of town, but we managed to talk for 20 minutes. To my surprise, he was delighted with the whole situation and advised me to accept it. However, he stressed that it is necessary to obtain copies of all documents. He exuded self-confidence, no matter how the situation turned out. I asked him to contact Sally on my behalf. Giggling uncontrollably, he finally ended the conversation. There was a large car wash station not far from Highway 90. I spent more than an hour thoroughly cleaning and vacuuming and finally carefully waxed the car. It would be easier to pay for professional service, but I was in desperate need of therapy. Before returning, I decided to have lunch at Cracker Barrel. In this way, I hoped to avoid the wrath of Betsy, who this time strategically parked right outside my room door. When I pulled up, Sally got out of the Jeep, looking a little confused. It was clear from her expression that Kevin had talked to her. Over the next 2 hours, she sincerely apologized to me, acknowledging the severity of her guilt. Sometimes guilt can have its positive consequences. By the time Miss Miller returned with the papers I was supposed to sign, Sally had already left. To my surprise, she insisted on handing me a check for $10,000. While Robert's campaign continued to fall, my divorce application moved smoothly through the legal system. Tracy was now living in College Station, and a friend was looking after him. The timing was perfect, and I officially divorced just before the election. Kevin came out the winner and expressed his gratitude, promising to reimburse me for the help personally. It seemed to me that I hadn't done much, but I jokingly told him that I would consider our candidacy even if he introduced me to his sister. In response, Sally playfully hit me on the arm. Unfortunately, the events unfolded not in favor of Amelia. After the election, due to an unexpected turn of events, charges of bigamy were brought against her. But before any action could be taken, she mysteriously disappeared. Disappearing seemed to be her specialty. Unfortunately, I never got to see or talk to her after that. I sold the truck and used the money to buy a house in a small gravel pit near Huron. Sally and I got married at Christmas, and all 5 of my boys were present. Betsy moved into a 2-story trailer house, assuring us that she would take good care of it. According to the ultrasound, we were expecting a girl. Does anyone have any suggestions for names for girls starting with the letter T? Story 2. Regarding my own story, I am a native of India who unfortunately faced a whole heap of troubles. Previously, I held the position of SE captain, and this profession required long business trips, usually for 3 months since I worked on ships. But the beginning of the pandemic complicated my financial situation. Flights were suspended, and no country allowed us to return, as a result of which I found myself in an even longer separation from my homeland. I had no idea that at that time, my wife, with whom I had been married for 16 years and whom I had known since childhood, had a love relationship with another man. To my horror, I discovered that she had had an intimate relationship with another man 3 times before I became aware of it. The details related to this revelation are complex and very large scale, but unfortunately, I have no one to share it with because of the shame I feel when talking about this difficult case. I cannot share it with my friends and family. In addition, the cultural spirit of India can be unforgiving. People are prone to hasty judgments. I'm tormented by doubts about the possible rumors that may spread if this news becomes known to everyone. Taking advantage of a slight easing of the restrictions associated with the pandemic, I returned to my hometown in July 2020 and lived with my family until December of the same year. Then I was forced to return to my work. It seemed that time flew by quickly in those days, and in general, we managed to maintain a semblance of happiness. But after returning home in March 2021, the first week seemed relatively calm to me. And yet, I had an uneasy feeling associated with one person whom my wife met during our usual morning walk. The way he greeted us caused an unpleasant feeling in me, and I could not help noticing that my wife blushes every time she meets him, feeling a hidden attraction. Over time, I couldn't help but notice that my wife was becoming more and more inclined to secrets. She deliberately hid information about some phone calls, despite the fact that I witnessed her conversations. But at one point, when we were driving home after lunch, her phone rang, and the name and surname of the caller appeared on the caller ID. I had my suspicions, and I specifically asked about the identity of the caller, waiting for a reaction. As I expected, she tried to deceive me by claiming that it was a fake call. This conscious display of deception caused me a feeling of anxiety and unease. Feeling an increasing desire to get answers, I began to search for the truth. At a convenient moment, I wanted to check her phone. One day, when she was taking a shower, I took the opportunity and secretly looked through her phone. Given our marital relationship, we often used shared phones. But when I began to delve into the contents of her phone, I made an unexpected discovery. The contact details of another man were deliberately erased. This further increased my suspicions. To gather more information, I decided to turn on her phone conversation recording. From that moment on, I began to check her phone regularly, hoping to stumble upon unusual calls that could give me answers to my suspicions. Finally, the fateful day came, August 2nd, 2021. Returning home after finishing my business, I noticed that my wife hastily finished a telephone conversation. Taking the opportunity, I discreetly checked her phone. To my considerable surprise, I found an incoming call from an unfamiliar number that lasted 29 minutes. Intrigued, I studied the number carefully, but I didn't find any names associated with it. Having understood the meaning of this unfamiliar number, I tried to write it down to remember it for the future. After listening to the recording of the conversation, I immediately experienced a mixture of surprise and disgust. The conversation I ran into was just discouraging, a dialogue that no one, especially a man, would want to eavesdrop on. The tone in which he spoke to her contained disrespect and indecency, treating her as a person who exchanges her honor and dignity for money. Naturally, this was a big surprise for me. Without thinking, I went to the kitchen where she was, determined to investigate the issue of her possible connection with this man. The accusation took her by surprise, and she seemed genuinely confused. After which, she confidently denied any romantic or emotional connection with him. I told her that I accidentally overheard their conversation, in which there were obviously a lot of obscene words. In response, she offered a rather ridiculous explanation, saying that it was just a friend who had a habit of talking like that. This explanation seemed to me very improbable, especially if we take into account the fact that throughout our common life path, she constantly emphasized the importance of respectful communication and loyalty. But despite my distrust, she remained adamant in her words, convincing me that there was no romantic relationship between them. In order not to reveal the secret of recording her calls, which could lead to an even greater aggravation of the situation, I decided to be patient and wait for new evidence. It was on August 4th, 2021, that the second decisive day came. That day, I received 4 more recordings of conversations, which became convincing evidence of my growing suspicions. The newly obtained records left no room for doubt, clearly indicating her active involvement in a physical relationship with another man. Armed with these indisputable proofs, I again came into conflict with her, presenting the records, which became an inevitable trap for her and made her feel cornered. Not knowing what to do, she admitted with great reluctance what had happened. Divorce in our country was a rare occurrence, which greatly aggravated the seriousness of the decision that now faced me, especially considering that we had an 11-year-old son. Everything was complicated by the fact that my work was connected with long business trips. I was gnawing at the thought that during my absence, she might have been with someone else, and this further complicated the situation. Before this incident, she constantly emphasized her loyalty, and I had no reason to doubt her. She honestly confessed, leaving no room for doubt, and said that she felt a strong attraction to this man. She said that during the difficult times of the pandemic, when I was often at sea because of the uncertainty of the situation in which we found ourselves, this person provided her with support. The long separation that we experienced made the situation even worse. I was overcome with anger. I could not get rid of the feeling of betrayal. While I was at sea, worrying about the welfare of my wife and son, she entered into an intimate relationship with another man. In addition, which further complicated the unpleasant picture, this was not an isolated case. It was shocking that even while I was working on the ship, a third incident occurred, which happened 4 months after my return home. The date has been preserved in my memory, July 21st, 2021. She admitted that this was the last case and said that she was going to stop the illegal intimacy. At the same time, she was afraid that another man might divulge the truth to me. From the point of view of logic, such an explanation looked unconvincing, since the second man was not only married but also had the profession of a lawyer, which of course could not but affect his reputation. This terrible discovery happened just 2 days after my birthday, which further increased the heartache. It turned out that the preparation and organization of their secret meetings took place on the very day when I celebrated the next year of my life and was fulfilling my official duties. It turned out that he rented a hotel room, and they spent time there together. The weight of this exposure shattered me, and I was consumed by intense mental pain. She begged me to find the strength to forgive her for this offense. Now, more than ever before, I wanted to trust her again, but the foundation of our faith had been seriously damaged. In an attempt to erase all traces of evidence, she deleted the dictaphone recording that I had discreetly installed on her phone. But she didn't know that I kept a copy in a separate place, so it became my indisputable proof. After listening to the conversations she had with another man, it became clear that there were no hints of ending the affair in them. This understanding destroyed my trust in her sincerity. That night, I could not accept the idea that she was sleeping in her bed, and she begged me, hoping for reconciliation. Their conversations kept popping up in my memory, and I could no longer forget or reduce the seriousness of what was happening. Even if she tried to reduce its importance, it was painful for me to realize that my wife, who had an affair, was now talking about her desire to return to her former life as soon as possible. She believes that if you constantly focus on the past, it will only complicate everything even more. I felt completely broken and humiliated because of her infidelity. It was difficult for me to find a person to whom I could confide and share my emotions. Now I feel trapped, not knowing what steps to take next. Divorce seems to be the only possible option. I turned to a therapist for help, but our conversation on the phone lasted only about 15 minutes. As a result, he recommended antidepressants to me, but I still haven't started taking them. Why should I take medication when my wife couldn't stay faithful to me? I saw her talking to another man, making it clear that she did not want to communicate with him anymore, but my anger and frustration remained the same as before. People like me, as sailors, often feel deprived of the attention of the working class. Now it seems that even our own community is not giving us the support we need so much. Here are some updates and explanations. After returning in March 2021, I decided to give up working on ships. Instead, I am actively looking for a remote job on land that will allow me to work from home. This will give me the opportunity to spend more time with my family, especially with my son. Feeling insecure during the first conversation, I made her make a second call to another man to clarify. I lacked complete information about their participation in the war effort at that time, and I wanted to achieve complete clarity and understanding. That man had no doubts about this situation. Immediately after that, my wife blocked his number, and since then, they have not communicated. It's been 2 weeks. I asked her to name the dates, and she named them, although not in writing. When I asked for details, her answer remained the same. At the same time, she gets upset and starts crying. I have to admit that she never blamed me for what happened. In fact, since that momentous second day, D-Day 2, when I found out the whole story, she took full responsibility and admitted that it was entirely her fault. She regrets that she did not seek the advice of a therapist before making this disastrous choice. At that time, we both believed that there were no problems in our marriage, but now we are faced with this problem. From the conversations I overheard, I learned that another man was constantly encouraging my wife, trying to justify an extramarital physical relationship by saying that they do not ignore their own families. These conversations seem to normalize such behavior. The man, who was married and had 2 children, claimed that his wife showed no interest in intimate life, but this does not justify the fact that my wife entered into an intimate relationship with him. Since then, I have not encountered him directly, since he did not live nearby. I used to accidentally bump into him during morning exercises on the hill. Having warned him loudly and clearly, I made it clear that if I met him again, I would reveal their secret to everyone. On the same day, I anonymously wrote a letter to the man's wife, in which I reported the details of their affair. In addition, I tried to contact her via Facebook, since I didn't have her phone number. The presence of my wife in such proximity caused me strong moral strain. I was getting more and more annoyed with her, even going so far as to call her a serial cheater. In response, she began to prove her case, claiming that there were no grounds for such an accusation. According to her, what happened is just a mistake that can only be regretted, and that happened only 3 times. Now I'm trying to figure out how she could have acted so frivolously. I understand that she may fall under the influence of other people, and in the past, I have repeatedly intervened to help her in such cases. Unfortunately, I wasn't around this time. I noticed traces of guilt in her behavior when she was at home during the affair, but when she talked to him on the phone, she seemed to turn into a completely different person who completely neglected her family. I keep asking myself, what is it about this strong feeling of falling in love or infatuation that makes people make such a disastrous choice? I have already thought about meeting this man more than once, but I cannot ignore the fact that he is a lawyer and apparently very insidious. It is likely that he has various tactics that can drag me into unnecessary litigation. The possible consequences in India, especially if a person has the right connections and sufficient financial resources to invest in solving such issues, are difficult to understand. Court cases can drag on for years, and there is no certainty that justice will eventually be restored. To my great surprise, his wife contacted me via Facebook and reported her sincere distress. She admitted that she had never thought about his infidelity. Having asked to give her the opportunity to listen to the audio recordings I suggested that she meet in person to listen to them. I thought it was important to personally share the recordings, not just hand them over. We agreed to meet in the evening in an inconspicuous restaurant outside the city where none of us would be recognized. When we finally met face to face, I saw his wife for the first time. When we told each other about the betrayal committed by our partners, a special closeness arose between us. Our shared experience brought us closer together. When we met, I played her the recording, and she felt a huge heartache when she heard the truth. I asked her about her future plans, to which she said she was not sure of herself. Her financial situation was very deplorable since her husband was the main breadwinner, and divorce could be a disastrous prospect for her. Having come to a common understanding, we parted ways, deciding to meet next week. We exchanged phone numbers and agreed on the next meeting. Feeling relieved that we both understand the pain of betrayal, it was a therapeutic experience to communicate with a person who had also experienced similar mental pain, and we continued to exchange messages to keep in touch. Her husband, compared to me, had more money and connections, which was important in our environment. But despite the attractiveness of his wife, it seemed that his infidelity was caused not so much by dissatisfaction with what he already had, but by a desire to get more. Before the scheduled meeting, we often corresponded, which led to feelings flaring up between us. When we finally met the following week, it became noticeable that there was a mutual attraction between us. We continued to meet constantly, and during one of the meetings, I became the first initiator of a kiss, which eventually led to an intimate relationship in my car. As this affair developed, I began to justify the idea of reconciliation with my wife, believing that it would somehow restore balance in the situation. Nevertheless, I decided to continue my relationship with this man's wife. Our affair continued for about 2 more months until her husband called me and demanded that I stay away from his wife. Without hesitation, I contacted her and asked her to explain how he found out about our secret. She said that during a violent quarrel, her husband accused her of infidelity, and in retaliation, she revealed our affair. To my surprise, she apologized to me for inadvertently putting me in a difficult position. After a while, my wife found out the truth about our affair and began insistently demanding that I immediately stop it. At first, I was disappointed with the other wife who betrayed me because she inadvertently revealed our infidelity and contributed to this mess. But soon, my irritation switched to my wife and her cheating partner, as their hypocrisy became quite obvious. Despite my wife's sincere requests to stop the affair, I decided not to pay attention to her and continued it. I remained indifferent to her desperate demand. I ended my affair only when this other man got tired of our relationship and threatened me with a lawsuit. Knowing about his ability to navigate the legal system, he was able to make my life very difficult. It was at this moment that I made the final choice in favor of ending the affair with his wife, realizing that I did not have the financial capacity to participate in lengthy litigation. Currently, I continue to make reconciliation plans with my wife, getting satisfaction from the fact that she knows about my relationship with another man's wife. My other spouse and I are in touch, but we made a mutual decision to end the physical relationship. Her husband sued me and constantly threatens me, creating an atmosphere of anxiety and uncertainty. In general, we decided that it was in our best interests to end any further intimate relationships. It was better for the two of us.